Welcome to the Lutheran Social Ministries of Maryland Leadership Series, where we interview some of our key team members within the organization and give all of our residents and team an opportunity to get to know them a little bit better on a personal level, some professional questions, but ultimately we like to put each of them on the hot seat every now and then. And so Terry Morse, our Director of Construction, is on the hot seat today. So he has agreed to a series of Q&A, and I didn't share that there's probably some questions I haven't told him about, but he'll do fine today. As he told me before we started, he is an open book, so we're going to test him on that today. So first off, tell us about your family.
Okay, so I'm married, and my wife's name is Teresa, and we have 3 children, Andrew, David, and Emily. Andrew and David are both married, and they have kids, so we have 7 grandchildren, and Emily is not married yet. But they all live locally. Our oldest lived in California for a while, so seeing them and their kids was tough, but they've relocated back here, and so we get to see all of them frequently.
Can you name all 7?
Absolutely.
What's the oldest and what's the youngest?
Well, Max just turned 11,
Okay.
and Reagan is the youngest, and she just turned 2.
Okay, terrific. Where did you meet your wife?
So I met Teresa in college. We both went to the University of Maryland, College Park, and that's where we met and spent a lot of time together, and knew pretty much from the beginning that we wanted to spend the rest of our lives together.
So that tells me a little bit more about you than I realized, and I didn't ask you this during our interviews with you. So you had the experience of going to school at University of Maryland, and then later worked for the university. So I'll jump to that question. So take us there, take us that leap forward, and I'll step back later into some of those other areas.
Okay, well, when I went to the University of Maryland, I got my degree in mechanical engineering, and I went to work for a consulting firm, and I worked for a couple different consulting firms for a while, and kind of got to know the HVAC industry, the heating and cooling, air conditioning business. And then an opportunity opened up where I could go work for the University of Maryland, but at the Baltimore campus, UMB, which is what they call the professional campus. It's a med school, law school, social work, dental school, pharmacy. That is in downtown Baltimore. So that's where I spent the majority of my career, is working ultimately as the director of design and construction for UMB, and we managed a portfolio of well over $100 million every year in construction projects. We had several campuses that we managed the construction for.
So give us an example of one of the larger projects that you've done there, and just to give people an idea of the scope of some of the work, because the money is impressive, the dollars are impressive, but yeah. Give us a different idea of what it looks like.
Multi-floor academic buildings, multi-floor medical research, laboratory buildings for the School of Medicine, dental school. So we built some very large state-of-the-art medical research facilities with BSL-3 labs and large lecture halls, kind of everything you'd expect to find at a modern university we built.
So how many projects per year do you think you were involved in, even if they were ongoing?
Yeah. So we'd always have 2 or 3 very large capital projects, because not only did we build for UMB, we built for Towson University, UMBC, Coppin State, University of Baltimore. We built a brand new law school for the University of Baltimore, state-of-the-art, LEED platinum design. So we'd always have 2 or 3 large capital projects that would go on for many years, several years, I guess you'd say. And then we would do well over 200 smallish projects, renovating a floor of a building, renovating an office, a lecture hall, ranging in size from maybe $50,000 up through several $1 million. So, and then the large capital projects were sometimes in excess of $100 million.
Okay. Yeah. So let's step back again into more of the personal side of things. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Silver Spring, just outside of Washington, D.C.
Okay. So you've always been in this area for the most
Always
part?
been in this area, yep.
And then, do you have any pets?
No, not now. So I actually own a small farm.
Right.
And so through the years, while our kids were growing up, we had animals of all different shapes and varieties.
Right.
We've had cows, we've had goats, we've had sheep, we've had chickens, rabbits, so we had quite a few. And we had a Great Pyrenees dog that was a livestock guardian dog. So
Okay.
that was our last pet, and of course it was a pet, but it lived with the animals to protect them and, take care of them.
Okay. So I bet your grandchildren love.
Well, since we've had grandchildren, we haven't had
you haven't had
the
them
Great
since
Pyrenees,
then.
and we haven't had any of the animals. When the kids started getting older, I got into coaching, and so I coached them in soccer and lacrosse and basketball, and so we kind of pulled back from the farming operation. It was just too much.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So you're still on the farm,
Mhm.
right? So grandkids come out.
Oh,
What are some of the activities that happen at the farm? Because you probably have a lot more land than maybe most people do.
We do. We have quite a bit of land. Most of the ground is either in woods or in hay fields now.
Okay.
So we make hay every year, bale it and all. But when the kids come over, interesting you asked, because we just had 5 of the grandkids over this weekend through the whole weekend.
Okay.
So they come quite frequently, and we have a big barn, and they like to explore the barn and play. And I have farm implements, tractors, this sort of thing. And some of the older kids love to operate some of that equipment under my supervision.
Sure.
Of course, but they love, like the one is old enough to drive the tractor, so he actually helps me quite a bit around the place. He'll drive the tractor, and I'll work on whatever it is I'm working, where I need the tractor, to help me with. So we have a very large play area that I built after we built the house.
Mhm.
And it's got swings and a slide and a fort, and so the kids spend a lot of time on that.
I grew up visiting my grandparents on a farm and yours is probably a little bit larger than theirs, but spent a lot of time learning how to drive a tractor
Mhm.
and those types of things,
Yeah.
which made me absolutely love going to visit them, because when you're involved in work, these are things that you don't get to do at home, and your parents probably don't allow you to play with. So to me it was fantastic, the amount of learning that you do that was seen as fun when you were a kid. So I'm sure they see it the same way.
They love it. And even the oldest grandchild, Max, who's 11, he's old enough to help, and he wants to come help. So Saturday we spend a good part of the day splitting wood. I have a hydraulic splitter, so he operates the lever, but I put the logs up. But I have a big pile of logs I need to split, so he's a big help.
Do you have to plan out the weekends when you have 5 kids there?
Somewhat, although we kind of just play it by ear a lot too.
Are they fairly self-guided?
They are.
Okay.
They are, and so it was 2 groups, so they're cousins coming together, and they love that. They love getting together with their cousins, and they're all our grandkids, of course. But to them, it's 2 different families coming together. So they go off, and they're running around playing tag or hide and seek or whatever.
Well, there's nothing like the gift of dropping your kids off at the grandparents'
And
house.
we love to have them.
So I appreciate that. So where do you live now?
In Carroll County.
Okay.
Yeah, we have our farm. It's down in the south part of the county, just north of Sykesville.
Good. So why did you decide to work at Lutheran Social Ministries?
Well, I was ready to retire from the university, but I wasn't ready to retire. I still, I love the construction industry. I love what I do. And I was looking for a place that I could use my experience and knowledge to help, somewhere. And I wanted to stay local. I didn't want to keep driving down to Baltimore or go, a long distance. And this is essentially almost in my backyard, so to speak. So it was very convenient from that standpoint. But also it was a challenge that I wanted to take on, to again help see if I could use my expertise to help with your building program. And the other thing that really appealed to me was the Christian-based values that you have here. And to me, that means a lot. Coming from a state institution where it was kind of frowned upon to express any Christian values, openly, it was a welcome change, and I really appreciate that.
Well, I remember you and I had several conversations when you were in the interview process about that. And so it was kind of, we were hitting two sides of the candidate that was very important to us, was that they understood our faith and philosophy here, and understood our mission and felt that they could be a proactive person in that, but also just having the experience that you do is wonderful. So let's talk a little bit more about that. It's one of those questions that I didn't put on the list for you, but when we think about the strategic direction of Carroll Lutheran Village or Lutheran Village at Miller's Grant, and how you fit into that, I know we've been evolving, and that's been something that we consistently work on when it comes to construction. But talk to me just in general terms about that process for you and adapting to the organization. Has it been easier to adapt, harder?
I felt like I kind of fit right in as soon as I came. I mean, because I know the business, I know construction, I know the industry, I have a good familiarity with not only the processes but the players. I really felt like I was able to step right in and contribute and help guide, the projects down the right path. What was unusual for me though, and has taken a bit to kind of get used to and see how I fit, was working with an outside project management firm that is on board here. So I kind of had to, didn't want to step on anybody's toes, but yet still look out for the best interests of LSMMD, and just make sure that they were providing the value that we're paying them to provide, but also let them do their work and not interfere, get in the way or clash, with because not everybody has the exact same philosophy when it comes to managing a project. So there's going to be a little bit of, I think it should be done this way, they think it should be done that way. But hopefully, I think we've been able to gel together pretty well. Let them do what they're good at, let me, kind of make sure we're getting our value and getting things done the way we need to get it done,
Yeah. Well, I think that speaks to that evolution of Lutheran Social Ministries in terms of how we go about construction projects, is that we've reached a point where we really needed somebody like yourself to help manage these projects and had the expertise level that really offered a critical element that perhaps we were missing. I think there's a number of us that are, as I would coin it, dangerous in different elements of construction, but by far we don't have the same sort of experience that you do or education. And so for us, this was a added benefit, and one that we hope you ask those questions or challenge certain ways of doing things. I think the tough thing that I always think about with you is by the time you joined, we were already knee deep in at least one or two of the projects, and so it makes it tougher to back in, but it allows us an opportunity to learn and grow from there, which is good. So one of the other elements that I was really interested in with you, and I remember asking you this question and it was related to students in Maryland and how that worked with construction projects. If you think about it with residents, how has that been a similar experience in terms of what you managed with students versus residents, or and if it's not, how is it different?
It's actually very similar. So where I was at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, there isn't much in the way of housing. Whereas here, all the projects they're working on include housing.
Sure.
So there is that difference, but generally speaking, it's very similar. We're working in an occupied building, typically, and unless it was a brand new building at the university, we would typically be operating the same way in an occupied setting. It's an office or a lab, or at least they go home at night and you have that overnight period where you can get critical work done or have outages. Here, there is a difference because the residents live here, and so outages that you might have, a power outage, water outage, whatever, is you really have to plan for. You have to make sure the residents are protected and they have what they need. You have to limit the duration of the outages so that they don't become, too difficult for the residents to handle. But people are people, and they're very curious, and they can be a bit obstinate. So you do have to plan for the passers-by not passing by, but trying to get in and snoop around and offer their 2 cents, and that's fine. It's welcome, really, because it gives us a chance to interact as long as we keep them safe.
Yeah.
Because you do have to protect the people who are wandering by the construction site from themselves.
Well, and you mentioned that to me at one point early on, which has always been a focus of mine, is how do you keep those areas secure, essentially, which in some cases are very challenging to do when you're working in the same hallway with residents, in essence, keeping people safe. And you noted something to me, I think it was in the last couple of weeks, which seems probably obvious to a lot of people, but if you are doing construction in most spaces, you're not having to worry about somebody who lives there. And so oftentimes that person will stop what they're doing and leave everything exactly how it is, where we have an element of cleanup, essentially. And at times that can be fairly extensive, especially in a public area that's traversed or that we think somebody might visit after hours.
Yeah, and they do.
So
yeah, and the worst case, the most significant case of that is what's going on right now in Avondale Place, where I say right now, we finally got it straightened out. For the last few weeks, the contractors and the residents were sharing the same elevator.
Yeah.
And so, and contractors, just because of the way they live and work, not live, but the way they do their jobs, they're not worried about cleanliness all the time. Whereas residents want the elevators to be neat and tidy and safe, And so we're constantly you have to be very vigilant to make sure the contractors, if they make a mess in the elevator by rolling a wheelbarrow in or, bringing materials in or whatever, that they clean up after themselves, frequently during the day, just to keep it usable for the residents.
I don't know if people know this, and so I'll ask this for the audience, but how frequently are you in touch with the project manager on site during the week?
Oh, several times a day. Yeah. Always.
Yeah. And it's a combination, I would assume, of things that you're seeing or hearing from the team, or maybe even hearing from a resident.
All of the above.
Yeah.
I get voicemails from residents, some angry, because of something they saw or experienced. I visit the site frequently, so I pick up things on my own, and then I go talk to the contractor and say, hey, you really got to, keep this up or whatever. I'll get messages from other staff, so all of the above.
And it doesn't include the actual formal meetings that you have.
Oh no, this is over and above the formal meetings. That's correct.
So So there are multiple formal meetings that occur each week. So
Right. And
depending
we
on the project.
review, we review all this stuff at every formal meeting.
One of the questions I'm asked frequently is what is done after the project in terms of the review, all the things that went well and what didn't go well. So can you talk a little bit
Sure.
about that?
Yeah, and I'll say that because Avondale Place project is immediately following on the heels of Windsor Terrace, it was a great opportunity to do a lessons learned review of Windsor Terrace even before it was done, so that we could make sure we picked up all of those lessons learned before we started in Avondale Place. It's always a good idea though to do a lessons learned, after the fact kind of review with the design team, with the contractor, with the key staff people here, just to hear everybody's perspective as to how well things went, they thought things went, what they thought could be done better, what went really well that we should keep doing, So we did have it was an hours-long meeting on Windsor Terrace just for that purpose, and we learned a lot. And we're hoping that the number of change orders will be reduced for Avondale Place because of what we were able to learn and then incorporate from the Windsor Terrace experience.
So thinking about the timing of when Windsor Terrace started, right in the middle of the pandemic, thankfully we, depending on what you view as the end point of the pandemic, we ended somewhere in that time frame with Windsor Terrace. We knew that there was going to be some challenges or differentiators with that project because of the timing. Outside of that, what has been some of the, is there a frustration or a surprise during that project that you didn't expect, or maybe you expected, but it just was more exasperated than you thought?
Well, probably the biggest is the supply chain issues. Things have cleared up a bit, but not completely. But we got hit with a major challenge, supply chain wise, for Windsor Terrace, and that was with all the heating and cooling equipment, to the point where we had to cancel orders and go in a whole different direction during construction. And then we had to scramble to make the changes to accommodate the new equipment. And it was just because the contractor could not get equipment. And unfortunately, the manufacturer kept promising delivery and then just saying, oh, sorry, we can't deliver. So, at some point, when you're in the thick of things, you're being promised deliveries. So it's really hard to pull the trigger to go in another direction when the whole design is based on this piece of equipment, and they're promising it to you over and over and over again. But at some point, you just got to read the writing on the wall and say, hey, we need to switch and do it now to minimize the problem.
Well, what's been a surprise to me on that, and you've done far more construction projects than I have, but everyone I've been on, you can relatively trust the general time frame that the vendor gave you. And I think that's the biggest challenge that I see, is that you plan it out the best you can, but we're seeing a lot of vendors promise a whole lot of things and not come through, and especially anything that is technical. And so I think that's been one of the harder things, and it's probably been one of the harder things for me to get across to residents and even team members in terms of why, because it seems like most things have gotten more normalized out there, and it really hasn't on the construction side quite as much as you hope. With some of the mechanical items. So
it's true. It's interesting though that for this, so for one vendor, deliveries are a huge problem and they can't seem to make orders, whereas another vendor of the same or very similar product, they're able to deliver on time.
Yeah.
So, and now with Avondale Place, we are realizing delays in other products that we did not have a delay with for Windsor Terrace.
Right.
So you just can't predict.
Well, and let me jump over. We talked a lot about Carroll Lutheran Village projects. Why don't we jump over to Lutheran Village at Miller's Grant for a second before we continue through some of the other questions. We've been in the phase 2 development process now for a better part of a couple of years. We're getting very close to being able to execute on that contract. You want to talk a little bit about why this project is so different than what we've experienced at Carroll Lutheran Village?
Well, as you said, we're still in the finishing up the design for Lutheran Village at Miller's Grant, whereas when I came on board for Windsor Terrace and then Avondale Place, the designs are pretty well done. I mean, we had already brought the contractor on board for Windsor Terrace when I joined. So for Lutheran Village at Miller's Grant, we're more in the finishing up the planning stages and getting it through all the approvals. And the approval process is quite daunting. And that can put its own delays on things, you know, and there were some things we learned, I guess, late in the day for that caused us to shift gears and modify the design somewhat. And of course, that has a ripple effect. You have to go back and make sure the civil drawings are all done right, as well as, you know, structural, architectural, mechanical. There's the things that ripple through when you change a floor plan. And we've made some of those changes in the interest of trying to expedite and get, you know, proper approvals and work off of original approvals that were still in place. So that was had its own challenges, but looks like we're pretty well
close.
Through or getting close to being through most of them. I think right now it's the stormwater management and the final permits, you know, building permits that we just need to obtain, and we'll be ready to start.
Well, and vastly different project when you're doing an addition versus current renovations. And so while we do anticipate residents be impacted, specifically those in the healthcare setting that'll be relocated for short periods of time, primarily it'll be traffic patterns and maybe parking and entry points, I guess, to buildings. So
no, you're right. For a new building that's being appended, if you will, added on to the existing, the disruption internal is much less, but exterior there's still quite a bit of impact, and we'll have to do some planning and coordinating with the residents.
And it'll be quite extensive as well. Do you anticipate a major difference in the ongoing experience with Howard County versus Carroll County, or anything from your past that
Carroll? So because we're renovating here in Carroll County, the impact isn't as great. Their oversight isn't quite the same. We don't have to deal with stormwater management. We don't have to deal with the planning office. It's really just about building to code and passing inspections, basically.
And in some cases, bringing it up to code, newer codes, right?
Yeah, bringing it. That's true. And some of that were some surprises that we had, where we thought we didn't realize that, you know, codes had changed, and we had to smoke detectors in every apartment. So for Miller's Grant, of course, there's a lot more planning that has to be done, and because we're disturbing the exterior, then stormwater management becomes a big deal, and, you know, making sure we're staying within our limits for the number of units and number of beds and that sort of thing.
Good. So how would you, we've been talking a little bit about it so far, but how would you describe your role?
My role. I look at my role and you know, from conversations with you and Steve and others, I'm primarily here to provide the oversight and management of all of our capital construction projects. Make sure that things are staying on schedule, things are staying within budget, help to, you know, establish the budgets, or at least, you know, check them to make sure we're still in the right ballpark, you know, because of inflation and supply chain, costs continue to rise, and then that threatens whether we can achieve what we want to achieve. But I see my role as that of just staying on top of all aspects of construction and making sure we have all the contracts in place, that we have good qualified contractors and consultants, and that if there's any stumbling blocks, I'm going to try to do what I can to remove them or overcome them so that we can stay on the schedule.
Sure.
So that we don't experience delays or budget overruns or quality issues. We also have to make sure we're getting what we are paying for, and it's what we want.
Yeah. So stay on that topic for a minute, because I know that's been a topic of interest for residents at Carroll Lutheran Village as well as Lutheran Village Millers Grant. When we talk about quality and that review after the project is done, how do you manage that walkthrough process and the ongoing, as I would put it, blue tape process that occurs, and the partners that are involved in that? How do you go about doing that, and how long can it take you at times?
Yeah. Well, and I'll step back just enough to say that we also meet with the residents and key stakeholders up front during design to make sure that we're hitting the mark and we're creating a design that meets the needs of all the participants. So then fast forward to the end of the project, as we complete each phase, we do a walkthrough where we inspect all the finishes, we test the equipment, make sure it's all working. We have a whole commissioning process where we put everything through its paces to make sure it's heating, cooling, the elevators are operating properly, whatever it is, electrical, lights are lighting, everything. So we test everything out, make sure it all works. And we do visual inspections to make sure everything's clean, and the baseboard is not nicked or gouged. It's fully painted properly, right colors. All the cabinets, the ceiling tile, everything that goes into the construction of the space it meets the specifications, is done in a satisfactory, workmanlike manner is a typical phrase. And that it's what it was originally designed to be. So yes, the architect will generally walk through, and we'll walk through with them, and they use blue painter's tape, and wherever they see like a gouge in the wall, or a missing door handle, or a light fixture that's not working, or whatever it is, any deficiency, they will note it down in the list. They'll keep a list. And then they'll also, if it's appropriate, they'll put like a piece of blue tape so that when the contractor's coming through in subsequent days, they'll know exactly where the blemish might be. Like in a big wall, you can't just say, fix blemishes in the wall, because the contractor will walk in and maybe not even see them, So you use the blue tape to help zero in, the person who's going to be doing the repairs, on where it is. But the architect also takes pictures of everything, so they generate what's called a punch list, and it's an electronic list of all the items that they identified, and there's typically a photograph attached to it to help them remember where it was, and to help the contractor zero in on where it is, so they know they're fixing the right thing.
So I was thinking about that punch list, and I know because of how unusual the construction industry has been through this period of time, that while we're doing the punch list, we're still waiting for some minor items at times, which usually you wouldn't put the cart before the horse, if you will. However, because of the length of time, we've had to start on some of those so you could release the subs to other jobs, right?
Yeah, although I would say that is fairly common. even pre-pandemic,
Okay.
even pre-supply chain
Gotcha.
issues.
Okay.
There was always some things that were on back order or a late design change, an owner change. You can't go through a project without owner making some changes. It's just unrealistic
True.
to think that you could,
Right.
because needs change over time. It
That's
evolves.
true.
So there's always late changes, and very often the contractor will say, "Hey, we noticed this, or this isn't working.
Mhm.
Should we fix it?" And 9 times out of 10, we're gonna say, "Yeah, please do." So then that could be part of a late
Yeah.
change. But we don't want to delay occupancy of a space for many reasons. You mentioned some. The contractors have to move on, or the space is usable. Why would we not allow the residents to move back? Or we want to sell some of the apartments if they're new, So there's lots of reasons why you want to occupy and start gaining beneficial occupancy.
Sure.
If you can come back later and drop a ceiling tile in, or a light fixture, or patch a wall, or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's not, and even here, when we moved down to this floor and the floor above, there was a list of things that had not been done right, or there was some missing equipment that was back ordered.
Right.
So that's kind of par for the course.
Sure. Well, and I think that part has been really beneficial to, it's a small component because you do it all the time, right? But just the fact that you were pointing some of these things out, that maybe we chose the wrong product, maybe we designed it in a way that didn't make sense. And I say we collectively, the folks on the development team. That said, it's great to be able to correct it then, versus just living with it and then figuring it out down the road and going, gosh, this doesn't make sense for the resident to occupy the space. But thankfully there hasn't been a lot of that.
There's
just
always
something
a
minor.
few.
Yeah.
Never had a project where there wasn't a few things
Yeah.
that you had to go back and fix.
And at times you rethink things. I think at times where you have some opportunities to invest in a space in a different way, you may come across things that would add something special to an environment. So sometimes that changes just by happenstance.
Yep, true.
So what question are you asked the most in your role, either by residents or team, or maybe it's two different questions?
That's not a hard question for me, because what I'm asked most is by the residents is, what impact is this project going to have on my apartment?
Okay.
And so I spend a lot of time visiting the residents one-on-one. We make an appointment. I go over with my tape measure and a printout of their apartment that I leave with them, and it's got dimensions on it because they want to know exactly, what size closet is going in to close in the new heating and cooling unit.
Sure.
So I don't know how many times I've gone over to residents, and I'm happy to do it. And I tell them at every meeting, we meet with them weekly. Call, let me know, stop in, after the meeting, tell me if you want me to come, and I'll come, we'll make an appointment, because it's their house, it's their home.
Sure.
They want to know what the impact is going to be.
Sure, no, that makes sense, and I was so glad that you were doing that, and I think the entire construction team that's been involved with transition or movement of residents, but also communication, has done a wonderful job, because I know there's been a lot of individual questions, and at times it makes more sense to answer them individually or go up to an apartment. And so I think that personal touch makes things flow much better, makes the communication work, which makes people feel more comfortable, not only with you, but with the process.
Yep.
So all kudos to you. What about the team? Anybody ask you anything from the team side of things?
Most of the questions I get from the contractor is, can we do something? Can we have a power outage tomorrow? Can we shut this down tomorrow? Can we use the elevator? So it's more about them wanting permission, to be able to do something. And, my typical answer is yes, and then just a matter of figuring out when, how soon, because we got to keep them moving.
Well, you got to communicate to the residents. You got to coordinate with the community team.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of movement back and forth, and probably a very short duration. So
Yeah.
So fast forward to Lutheran Village Millers Grant, and let's say we're at a point where independent living is now constructed, and we have residents moving into those spaces. Have you already envisioned the types of meetings you'll end up having with individual residents on their apartments, since we're not reconfiguring an existing space?
I really haven't thought that far ahead yet. Once we get to the point where the residents have moved in, most of the questions then are, can you show me how to make the thermostat work?
Right.
Because the thermostats can be complicated.
Sure.
But I think the whole industry has missed the mark on making things simple, especially for a community that really needs to have things a little bit more simple and easy. They don't want to program, 7 days, of different temperatures and the shut off here and turn on here. Most of them just want to set the thermostat to a setting and walk away.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's hard to find the thermostat that will allow you to do that.
Yeah.
And still meet all the other needs. So I just use that as an example. I think most of them will want to tell me about. Most of my questions that will come from residents will be, how do I do this, or how do I fix that, or why did you build it this way?
Yeah.
We really, just as an example, we're already getting comments about microwaves that are either too high when they're up under the counter or too low when they're down in a drawer.
Sure.
And both of that is challenging for some of these residents who really want it right on the counter.
Well, and you're touching on something outside of the microwaves about technology, and anything that's technology laden. There's a lot of information out in our industry in particular about smart homes, and trying to find that sweet spot of what a smart home is for our industry, let alone for our organization, is interesting to me, because you said something that really resonates with me, that needs something to be relatively simple, but it also needs to be products that people use the most, and so there's maybe more of a chance of that individual programming these. But also it needs to be somewhat intuitive, because it needs to be easily reprogrammed if we have a change in residents in that particular unit, for example. But what's always interesting to me is I always use the example in my own home where I have an oven that I know I could download the app for it. I don't personally have it, but I could turn on my oven, on my way home from work. Seems dangerous to me, the big picture of things if nobody's home, but that said, it's interesting the things that you could do.
Exactly.
The ones that become more useful for me are my garage app. I can tell when my garage door's been left open by my kids. Those types of things, which makes more sense to me. But that said, I know there's probably somebody out there who would say, "Hey, I love that oven. I love that oven. I'm able to do different things with it."
So since you brought that up, I'll just share with you. My experience with engineers primarily is they really want to go to the nth degree for the latest technology, state of the art. And I learned when I was a senior in college, actually, I had a project that I was assigned with my team, with a group, and it was all about designing it was a solar powered grain dryer, but using appropriate technology. And that was a key phrase, and it comes back to me all these years that I've never forgotten that term, appropriate technology. And it's just what we're talking about here. What technology is appropriate for the user?
Okay.
So we could have designed a solar air grain dryer that used the state-of-the-art solar panels and computer control, temperature, and all this, but we were specifically told that it was going into like a kind of a poor area of somewhere in Africa, actually. And they didn't have access to all this technology. So we had to use very basic materials, readily available, cheap materials. And so that, and we had to consider the user, you know, how sophisticated or not the user would be.
Sure.
And so I just bring that up as an example. So like for today, we do have to consider, and this is what I'm always saying to the design team, remember who your users are.
Yeah.
They're elderly people. Sometimes they can't see that well, and they need large numbers. You wouldn't believe how many times I get this from the residents when we meet with them. I can't read this, or I can't see the numbers on the microwave or the thermostat because their eyesight is failing.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by appropriate technology.
Sure.
You need to design things that are simple enough for people who either don't have the ability or don't have the interest in setting up these complicated programs, or having it be able to do all this wonderful stuff.
Well, and I'll add another wrinkle to that is we don't want to be in a scenario where information technology or the IT team is dependent on to set up each individual one and manage them. It'd be too much for the team to be able to manage, let alone monitor.
Yeah.
And keep other important functions moving throughout the community.
Right. I mean, we're having that problem now, frankly, in Windsor Terrace, where the resident calls a contractor and says, "Help! I need help with my thermostat." They come, they set it all up, they go away. Next week, help! I need help with my thermostat because they touched it.
Yeah.
And it's a shame. You can't blame the resident. They're trying to live and maintain their temperature, and sometimes the technology is too much.
Yeah. Yep. So we're going to switch gears here again. So how do you spend your spare time? Do you have any hobbies?
I do, but I have more projects at this point than I have hobbies.
Okay.
So working on a major addition on my house.
Oh, no kidding.
I'm working on some projects in the barn. I'm just working on the typical maintenance type things around the farm, So I mentioned we split wood the other day. I've got a mountain of logs I got to get through before it rots, from the rain. So it's just, I don't really have time for hobbies.
Okay.
I really more have, so I'm either spending time with the family and the grandkids, or I'm working on projects around the house.
Okay. That's okay. So if you could have lunch with any person, who would you choose and why?
My idol all my years growing up was a incredible inventor by the name of Richard Buckminster Fuller. He went by Buckminster, so his name was R. Buckminster Fuller, and he's passed away now, but he lived well into his 90s, and he was inventing. He was an engineer, and he came up with some incredible inventions. He was a genius. I feel like he was a genius on the order of like Albert Einstein or some of the others. But one of the things he's most known for is the concept behind the geodesic dome, and the whole idea of maximizing space while minimizing the enclosing envelope from an energy efficiency standpoint. But he invented what was called the Dymaxion car, which was an incredibly efficient automobile back in the 50s. He was just an incredible guy.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
When did you first learn about him?
When I was in high school, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool. Mm-hmm. So what's on your bucket list?
There are a few things, but I think the thing I really would like to do when I retire is to hike the Way of St. James, the Camino de Santiago.
Yeah.
It's the typical route. There's many routes, but most people start in France and then they hike south down through Spain to Santiago.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Yeah,
That'd be amazing.
I'd love to do that.
Will your wife go?
She won't do it,
Okay.
but we have some friends we met through church that we're pretty close with, and all the guys want to do it, and I don't think any of the wives want to do it. So that's something I think we'll do once everybody retires.
Do you hike now?
I do. My son primarily and we've hiked some sections of the AT over the years. So we love to do that.
What's the distance in the hike that you're referencing in France?
Well, the most recent one we did was the 40 miles section that starts at Pennsylvania line and you go down through Maryland, to Harper's Ferry. Yeah, and then we've done sections down in Virginia as well.
Yeah, did it take you 2 or 3 days to do the 40 miles?
We did it in 3 days.
Okay.
Yeah, three nights. Friday to Sunday.
Now, did you get off the trail or did you camp on the trail?
No, we camped.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to give you a hard time. You got off the trail.
No.
It's too easy in that 40 mile section to get off the trail.
That's true. Have you hiked?
Yeah, I've done most of the Mid-Atlantic Appalachian Trail.
Great.
Yeah, I've done most of Virginia.
Wonderful.
West Virginia's too easy, but all of Maryland and a large portion of both Pennsylvania and North Carolina.
That's awesome. You've done more than I have.
Yeah, so I've done chunks at a time and try to knock out large sections. You know, the problem that I usually share with folks is that I hike both ways. Okay. So if I hike 15 miles one way, I've got to hike back the 15 miles, and so I will do that if I get off to an early start and have an extra long day, but. It also depends on the topography for that day.
Sure.
And, if I really want to do that, but when I was younger, I used to not mind if I was in a park that I could hitchhike because I knew a park ranger would pick me up and it'd be okay. That said, now that I'm a little bit older and have too many kids, I don't do that too frequently anymore. So
you're not one of those maniacs who runs the Appalachian Trail.
No. But I do hike at a brisk pace.
Okay,
I
great.
do hike at a brisk pace, but I always plan it to where I stop somewhere and have lunch or some sort of meal on the trail.
So do you not camp? You do what you can in a day typically?
I do camp. I don't enjoy it as much anymore though.
Okay.
I admit I don't sleep as well for some reason.
Gotcha.
I think I was a little looser when I was younger than I am now. I'm
I'm
wound a little tighter now, I guess. That said, if I have somebody with me, I will, but it's pretty rare. It's pretty rare that I have family or somebody else with me. It's usually a very short hike then. But I do enjoy it. Occasionally I can bring my boys out, and the 3 boys will go for about 8 miles with me.
Great.
And they, at least 2 of them will get it done long before I finish. So they'll take off and wait for me at the car. So, which I don't mind.
Yeah,
so
sure.
have fun with it. Could you live without the internet?
I could. I mean, it's a great tool, and it's wonderful having all that information at your fingertips. But I don't need it. I'm definitely not in social media at all. I don't have any of those accounts, and I don't miss it. Yeah. I've never had it, so I couldn't miss it, but I don't want it.
You don't care for it?
No.
Gotcha.
So I could live without it. I often, I won't say worry, but if the thought crosses my mind that we, with a major cyber attack of some sort, we could be back there.
Yeah.
And I often think we need to be prepared for that.
Oh,
frankly.
One thing that I hadn't heard you mention is I know that you have an affinity for football.
Oh, I do.
So talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, played football all my life, and I love it. And I grew up in the D.C. area, so I'm definitely a Redskins fan. Of course, now they're the Commanders, but I'm not one of those hard cases who won't say Commanders.
Yeah.
Others are. But and my dad actually got season tickets when I was in elementary school.
Okay.
and he never let him go. So when he was in his 90s, he transferred them to me.
Very nice.
So we still have them, and so we go every year. We
You
go
go
to all
to
the
every
home,
game?
we go to every home game, even the preseason games.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, we love football, and we actually started when I was in high school. A group of my friends, my brother and I, and a group of our friends started an annual Turkey Bowl game
Mm-hmm.
that we have continued playing to this day.
Okay.
So it's been over 50 years
Wow.
that we play every year right around the Saturday after Thanksgiving.
Okay.
We play a Turkey Bowl game.
Are the grandkids now playing?
Oh yeah,
football?
yeah. My son, all my kids have play now. They've been playing for years, and we're talking about Max. He's old enough now to play
Okay.
this coming year if he wants to.
So is it a very serious game or is it playful?
Well, it used to be tackle,
Okay.
but as you know, when I guess probably around when we started having kids, we went to flag football.
Okay.
So that's what it is now.
Gotcha. So where do you like to go when you eat out?
So my wife has celiac disease, so we have to be very careful where we eat, and so that limits your choices quite a bit. But there are some good restaurants down in the Sykesville, Eldersburg
Mhm.
area that we go to frequently, and they take care of, they do gluten-free very well for my wife.
Good.
So there's, I don't know if you want names of those restaurants.
Throw them out there. Throw them out there. It might be helpful for anybody that's listening.
Yeah, well, Glory Days is a fun place to go. We would very often go there to watch the away games.
Okay.
But they have a separate gluten-free kitchen, which makes it really convenient for my wife.
That's nice.
But there's also, we like the Basta Pasta that's down there, Liberatories that's down there. 7556 is a relatively new restaurant that takes care of my wife very well as well. That's down in the town of Sykesville. So there's quite a few places that we like to go.
Great. So what did we miss? What else can we share with the audience? What should we know about you?
Well,
Give us a parting word.
well, you are catching me by surprise with this question.
Right.
But I guess I would say maybe something that not everybody knows about me is when my wife and I first got married, we decided we wanted to buy a farm, so we bought some ground, and we designed and built our own house. So we did it all. We built the house from scratch.
Oh wow.
Laid all the block, did all the framing and everything.
Oh, that's amazing. Is
So-
that what you're doing with the addition?
And that's what I'm doing with the addition.
No kidding. So you're doing it all yourself. Are you
All myself,
wiring
yeah.
everything?
Wiring. I had to
plumbing?
take a test to do to be allowed to do the wiring.
No kidding.
Yeah.
No kidding.
So,
So is your wife out there hammering with you?
well, not now. She did when we were building the house, though. One Christmas, I gave her a hammer for Christmas, and
Yeah.
she loved it.
Oh, that is terrific.
And we worked side by side building
How
the house.
amazing. Did you build the barn too?
No, the barn is a pre-Civil War bank barn,
Okay.
and we actually it needed a lot of repairs, so we were finally able to bring an Amish crew down about 5 years ago, and they stripped it down to just the frame. They repaired the frame members that needed it. They rebuilt and pointed up the stone wall foundation, and then they put a whole new floor in, a whole new skin, a whole new roof. They did a beautiful job.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for taking the time and sharing with our audience and giving us a chance to get to know you a little bit better. And
Sure.
certainly look forward to the next opportunity to interview our next leader within LSMMD. So thank you, Tara.
Thank you very much.